Tonight from Baghdad, U.S. forces nab another most wanted fugitive, the half-brother of Saddam Hussein. The leadership vacuum. Who's running things here? Everyone and no one. An epidemic of bank robberies turns U.S. Marines into the Baghdad police. And Baghdad school children. What's next for them?
Also tonight from the home front, what if SARS hit a major city in North America? It has. We'll take you there. And Dr. Robert Atkins is dead. We'll have the legacy of a man and his revolutionary weight loss plan.
This is the CBS Evening News. With Dan Rather reporting tonight from Baghdad.
Good evening. It's their responsibility now. U.S. forces are struggling to bring some kind of order back to this city. Here are today's major developments. U.S. troops caught bank robbers in the act today, foiling yet another heist. The Marines took custody of $4 million for safekeeping. The FBI is joining the hunt in Iraq for priceless artifacts looted from world-famous museums and libraries. In Saddam Hussein's hometown north of Baghdad, U.S. Marines tried to keep the peace by keeping Saddam loyalists and rival gangs apart. And U.S. commandos bagged the Five of Clubs, grabbing another half-brother of Saddam. We begin our coverage tonight at the Pentagon, where CBS's David Martin has the big picture.
There are weapons everywhere in Iraq. Weapons children play on, weapons in schools, weapons towed through the streets. But it is the weapons they can't see that worry U.S. troops the most. Weapons hidden on civilians and weapons of mass destruction which still have not been found and may not be found until Iraqis point the way.
I don't think we'll discover anything myself. I think what will happen is we'll discover people who will tell us where to go find it.
Overnight, U.S. troops discovered and captured one of Saddam's half-brothers, Barzan Ibrahim Hassan, number 38 on the list of the 55 most wanted. In the mafia-like world of Saddam's regime, he was a made man. Not only do he and Saddam have the same mother, but his daughter married Saddam's son, the powerful Uday. Barzan once headed the Iraqi intelligence service, but then seems to have been exiled to Switzerland, where he spent most of the 1990s managing Saddam's investments. Barzan says he wants to be helpful, but U.S. officials doubt he can lead them to weapons of mass destruction or solve the mystery of Saddam's whereabouts. The Arab network Al Jazeera showed pictures of what it said was Saddam's last bunker, with furnishings that look identical to those seen in a videotape released during the war as evidence Saddam was still alive and in control. The U.S. has searched the rubble of that palace and bunker complex attacked on the opening night and found no evidence of his remains. The F-117 stealth fighters which flew that mission have returned to their home base in New Mexico, and not even the pilot who dropped the bomb knows.
I guess we won't know for a while yet what exactly we did hit.
The U.S. has yet to excavate the crater from the second strike on a Baghdad neighborhood where Saddam had been spotted, but residents say he was next door in a house that survived largely intact. Although Saddam's half-brother was found in Baghdad, U.S. intelligence believes many of the regime leaders are hiding in northwestern Iraq, trying to escape into Syria. Dan?
In this inevitable vacuum between the ouster of Saddam Hussein's regime and the arrival of the U.S.-nurtured, quote, democratic replacement, there is much room for maneuvering for power. The seeds of conflict are everywhere over who has won the right to rule.
We've been elected by the public, by the religious leaders.
Elected may be too strong a word, but that's the claim from this new band of, quote, liberated politicians. Shudat Obeidi declared himself the elected mayor of Baghdad, something this city hasn't had in decades. Mohammed Zubeidi says he's Iraq's governor. Their authority, they say, comes straight from a coalition of clerics, academics, and tribal leaders, not to mention the U.S. military. Officially, the Pentagon says it's not in the voting booth.
There are a number of emerging leaders throughout Iraq, and the coalition works with a number of them on a variety of levels. I'd like to just leave it at that.
For people burdened so long under a dictatorship, they seem to take to American politics like they've lived it all their lives. But real democracy, many say, will take much more than ceremony.
There's no quick fix for contemporary Iraq.
The problem, many of those who want to rule Iraq have spent the least amount of time in Iraq. Most are dissidents who fled, they say, for fear of persecution under Saddam and are only now coming back to enjoy the fruits of liberation.
There are many, many Iraqis who endured the brutality of Saddam Hussein who question whether the exiles have the right to rule.
People like Wamid Nadami, for example.
I would like very much to know who are those people who elected him.
As a reminder of America's military might flew over his riverfront home, Wamid Nadami, who was a leading advocate of democracy under Saddam, questioned whether the men now attempting to bring democracy to Iraq were even the best of the expatriates.
At least one could admit that among some of those people are some qualified, some people with education, some people even with integrity. None of the people who have been appointed up to now are of this category.
Trying to wring a measure of law and order from the chaos of this city, U.S. troops are forced to act as the Baghdad police. CBS News correspondent Lee Cowan reports the troops have quickly won a reputation as a bank robber's worst enemy.
It was the end of one elaborate sting, and the U.S. Marines couldn't wait to show off whom they'd stung. Tonight, 3 bank robbers are in custody. Nabbed trying to carry out a daring daytime heist that sounded more like the Wild West than West Baghdad. All across this city, U.S. Marines have turned into a bank teller's best friend, rounding up Baghdad's worst. At this bank across town, they foiled the attempted robbery of more than $4 million in U.S. currency. But at this branch, 2 vaults had already been looted, and a third was up for grabs.
And the thieves were pretty determined. In order to get to the vaults down below, they dug through at least a foot of solid concrete with rebarb, dug a hole just big enough for one person, probably just a boy, to slide all the way down into the vault and then hand the money back up to those who were waiting above.
How much was down there, you think?
There was 25 bags full of money.
So the Marines set a trap.
We left a couple fellas on the inside. Hit them in the dark corners.
I just stood right here like this and laid like this, and then the guys came in. When they came in, the first one went right for that hole, and as soon as he came around, I just came up and got him. It was pretty intense. They just didn't expect anybody to be in here.
Let alone U.S. Marines.
Right.
Okay. All right, good work.
But much of the damage had already been done. The vaults emptied the night before had then been torched. Still smoldering this morning, the fires couldn't even be put out until these Marines tracked down this company's fire truck. It too had been stolen.
They don't value very much at all. They're just thieves.
Thieves who are now in the custody of bewildered local authorities. They may have plenty of prison cells here, but still very little law. Lee Cowan, CBS News, Baghdad.
Art experts are urging U.S. troops to guard Iraqi cultural sites, and the FBI now says it has sent agents to help recover stolen artifacts. The experts said some of the looters had keys to vaults and apparently belonged to organized gangs of thieves. But thousands of priceless artifacts on display at Iraq's National Museum and other sites were smashed to bits. The head of a U.S. Presidential Advisory Panel on Cultural Property has resigned to protest the failure of U.S. troops to prevent the looting. Besides possibly harboring wanted Iraqi fugitives, Syria is on the list of states the U.S. says supports terrorism because of its backing of groups such as Hezbollah. With Syria under growing pressure from America, the threat from Hezbollah may be growing. CBS's Jim Stewart has looked into this.
They were once considered the baddest of the bad, at the top of the pecking order of Middle East terrorist organizations. Until 9/11, Hezbollah, the so-called Party of God, had killed more Americans than any other group, starting with 241 in a suicide bombing of Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983. Lately, however, Hezbollah had been relatively quiet, letting groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad take the lead in suicide bombing attacks against Israel and leaving al-Qaeda to press the attack against America. But Hezbollah has suddenly started talking loud again. Even before the Allies invaded Iraq, the group began calling for suicide attacks against American forces. And U.S. officials have left no doubt they now consider the Party of God as dangerous as al-Qaeda ever was.
But I'll tell you that Hezbollah, as an organization with capability and worldwide presence, is its equal, if not a far more capable organization.
The change in dynamics is a direct result of more U.S. muscle in the region, beginning with the takeover of Afghanistan and continuing into Baghdad. Both Syria, a key base for Hezbollah, and Iran, the group's chief sponsor and paymaster, are now just an artillery round away from battle-hardened U.S. forces. The danger, some U.S. officials believe, is that Hezbollah may feel so threatened that it decides to take the first punch, and it has plenty. Some of its Saudi members are accused of making the attack on Khobar Towers, a U.S. barracks in Saudi Arabia. More recently, Hezbollah is believed to have been active in teaching other groups basic terrorist techniques, including their favorite, large explosives and roadside bombs. Dan?
132 Americans are now officially listed as having been killed in the war here. 2 of them were laid to rest today at Arlington National Cemetery. Marine Lance Corporal Patrick Nixon was killed by Iraqi troops pretending to surrender near An-Nasiriyah. Air Force Major Gregory Stone was killed in a grenade attack by one of his comrades. Nixon was 21 years old from Gallatin, Tennessee. Stone, 40 years old, was from Boise, Idaho. I'll be back from here in Baghdad later in the broadcast. The CBS Evening News continues now with Harry Smith in New York. Harry?
Thanks, Dan. And coming up next on the CBS Evening News, a major North American city copes with a deadly outbreak of SARS. China insisted today it has handled the SARS outbreak there responsibly. Health investigators had accused Beijing of underreporting the problem. The pneumonia-like disease has now spread from Asia to more than 20 other countries, killing at least 166 people. 65 have died in Hong Kong alone. And all airline passengers there, the few there are, must now submit to temperature checks for signs of fever. At Singapore's airport, they're using high-tech thermal imaging scanners to check all travelers' body temperatures. In this country, health officials said today there are now more than 200 suspected cases of SARS, but no deaths. It's a different story right next door in Canada, with 13 recent deaths in and around Toronto. Medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon is there on the CBS Health Watch.
The SARS scare in Toronto took a giant leap forward this week when the virus showed up in an unexpected place, church. 500 members of a Catholic worship group have now been quarantined. 31 of them have been diagnosed with the acute respiratory illness that can be deadly. Dr. Sheila Bassrohr is Toronto's medical officer of health.
The change that's happened recently has been its migration, if you like, into community settings.
It turns out, despite extraordinary efforts to contain SARS in the hospitals, one of the church members had carried it into his community. Now many here are wondering if the new outbreak means SARS can't be stopped.
Had you been thinking it was contained, more or less?
Well, yes, we thought we had the problem licked. And unfortunately, part 2 is now upon us.
Part 2 means health officials are now urging people, even with headaches and coughs, to stay at home. An estimated 10,000 people province-wide have been subject to quarantines.
The uncontained SARS situation has created a great deal of tension among Toronto's 1.5 million Catholics. Many people feel torn between wanting to stay home and wanting to attend crowded church services during this most holy week of the year.
Religious leaders insist good health is part of good faith.
Our religious duty is our civil duty, our public health duty.
The Archdiocese has even issued new guidelines to make upcoming church services germ-free. No drinking from the communion cup. Greetings will be in the form of bows, not handshakes. No kissing of the crucifix on Good Friday. Even confession will no longer be held in the private, closed quarters of the confessional. This new outbreak has shown health officials they have to get smarter.
If you're not ahead of it in terms of very rapid response, it can always be a step ahead of you.
Clearly, those who do venture out into this city's streets and into the houses of worship this week will be praying that SARS goes away, and soon. Elizabeth Caledon, CBS News, Toronto.
5-month-old Dylan Sellers went home from a California hospital today, a month after receiving a heart transplant. You may recall Dylan's father made the tough choice to leave for the Persian Gulf with his Marine unit before knowing whether his baby boy would get the life-saving transplant in time. Dylan's dad is still deployed in central Iraq. Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, the death of Dr. Robert Atkins, the man with a controversial diet plan used by millions of Americans. Billionaire John Paul Getty Jr. died today in London of a chest infection. The American-born son of the founder of Getty Oil gave hundreds of millions of dollars to charity and became a British citizen late in life. He was 70 years old. Here in New York City, Dr. Robert Atkins, author of the popular weight loss plan, died today 9 days after injuring his head when he fell on the ice. Atkins was 72. And as correspondent Mika Brzezinski reports, he bucked the medical establishment right to the end.
Dr. Robert Atkins was a young cardiologist when he read about a new low-carbohydrate diet. He tried it himself, and it worked so well he changed his practice to preaching low carbs and started a diet revolution. Eat eggs, meat, and cheese, Atkins said, but no breads, rice, or pasta. They are the enemy of everyone who wants to lose weight. And he was willing to take on anyone who disagreed.
They are bread pushers.
The American Medical Association dismissed the Atkins diet as potentially dangerous, incorrect, and bizarre. But Dr. Atkins stuck to it for more than 3 decades.
If you cut out carbohydrates, you automatically burn your stored fat. That's the basic principle. It's been known for about 35 years.
More than 15 million copies of Dr. Atkins' Diet Revolution sold. An updated version in the 90s sold another 10 million. And his latest book, Atkins for Life, is at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. Even though the government never endorsed his diet, several recent medical studies showed that people on Atkins lost weight without compromising their health. Some even saw health benefits.
We compared the Atkins diet to the American Heart Association recommended diet and found that it was better for weight loss and for changes in cholesterol.
The success of the Atkins diet has forced the medical community to rethink how to treat obesity. And while many maintain the key to losing weight is fewer calories and dieting longer, Dr. Atkins could have the last word after all. Mika Brzezinski, CBS News, New York.
At the Vatican today, Pope John Paul celebrated Holy Thursday, commemorating Jesus' Last Supper, which Christians reenact when they take communion. The Pope used the occasion to issue a stern reminder to Catholics that they may not receive communion in a non-Catholic church, and that divorced Catholics who remarry are barred from communion. That's the news from the home front tonight. I'm Harry Smith in New York. Dan Rather will have more from Baghdad when the CBS Evening News continues in a moment.
Back now from Baghdad. Life for Iraqis is moving into a new phase. They've survived the war. Now they struggle to survive the peace. Death and survival were once the big picture items here in Baghdad, but people are beginning to ask, what's next? Whatever the past week's personal hell, most Iraqis have survived, although they're now focused on the future. As one man said, what is the purpose of surviving if all we have is existence but no work? For some, survival means fighting again. The instinct to defend property often outweighs the fear of death. There is another desperation. No more Saddam police, they chant. It would be unbearable if they got the same old police force back again, Saddam's men with a different badge. The clergy are determined Iraq will not get a retread government. Both Sunni and Shiite leaders say what's next depends on them agreeing. But just in case, pistols are appearing on prayer mats. Ceremonies banned under Saddam are back, although some beat their chests with a little too much fervor. And the Shiite mullah was clear. American democracy, he said, is not appropriate here. We prefer the kind which exists in Iran. We don't know what the future is for Iraq, but we do know who it is for. The children, of course. For them, the rules are usually simple. Have fun. Life is forever. Although eventually they learn otherwise. Iraqi children have learned the truth early. Many are already weary of the life they have barely begun. They don't know enough to think about what's next. And that's part of our world tonight. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting from Baghdad. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, log on to cbsnews.com. Why can this young snowboarder fly so high? Eye on America tomorrow. Experience CBS News.